Thank you very much. So this will be recorded, by the way. Okay, so I'm going to be stepping back, and Catherine is going to be stepping forward with Daniel. And Catherine, she's an artist, author, editor, and indie publisher, originally from Texas and now based in the Netherlands. She has written extensively on contemporary art and photography, most notably her book Unique, Making Photographs in the Age of Ubiquity, and in her former role as chief editor of Gup magazine. She's the founder of independent arts publisher House of October, as well as the creator of online platforms Riding the Dragon and Useful. And she's lived abroad for the last 20 years. And so, Catherine, so glad to
Hi.
have you here to talk about your book. And
Thank you.
you're going to be joined by Daniel. Daniel J. Cecil is a writer and professional writing coach living in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. He has an MFA in fiction writing from the University of Washington, where he also taught in the creative writing program for 5 years. He currently teaches travel writing at Emerson College in Limburg, as well as one-to-one writing coaching and master classes at Honing House. His writing has appeared in many literary journals and magazines, among others, The Rumpus, the Heavy Feather Review, the LA Review of Books, and Barrel House. And welcome, Daniel.
Ah, there I am. Hello, everyone.
So we're going to allow you guys are going to be talking about the book together. I will be stepping back, but I encourage everyone who's listening, if you would like to, in the chat, enter questions at any time. At the end, I will be back for a Q&A. So just as your questions come up, enter them into the chat and I'll be gathering them up. All right. Have a great conversation.
Thanks, Elysia.
All right. First off, yeah, welcome everyone to this book launch. If you haven't seen the cover yet, I don't know if it was held up just yet, but here it is. I'll swear. It's a very lovely cover. Very, yeah. Wonderful publisher, Leapy Man. And I've thoroughly enjoyed this book, Catherine. And I think the first thing that popped out to me, of course, was the first page because it starts out with a provocation that when you get restless and you're not moving, that you have a tendency to want to move again, to get away. And I think for me, that brought up the question, why this book and why now? What prompted you to release this?
Well, I mean, you start with the opening page, and I think it's important to say, like, the opening page where the book starts with a lot of bravado. It's
Mhm.
this kind of really confident, almost aggressive, like, yeah, it feels good to go. You leave people behind, and it's just it is the preface to a downfall, obviously.
Yeah.
All that overconfidence of the way that things feel good to go. But it was in response to this compulsion that I'd felt for quite some time, which was just to be constantly moving, to always wanting, I mean, just to be restless in my own skin all the time. And a lot of that did have to do with travel because I'm a traveler. I live abroad as well. And I like to be going to other places to explore, to move. But I think it's also about so many other things that are just about not staying in one place, not being present in the room where you're in, such as, for example, when you're clicking around on a mobile phone or looking at the internet, or
Mhm.
just trying to escape yourself.
Yeah, which brings up another kind of um, yeah, you say that the story starts with a lot of bravado, leads to a downfall, and I'm curious because a lot of what you write about here is maybe a little bit more youthful experience than now, and I'm curious how travel has changed for you. Do you still travel in the same way you used to, or has your approach changed? What do you take away from travel now that you're maybe a little bit older, maybe a little bit wiser? Hopefully,
Hopefully.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, most of the material for this book was written, give or take, 10 years ago. Sometimes I was writing about periods much earlier, of course. Um, So I'm writing about this slow awakening to what we can optimistically call wisdom. Um, and I don't travel this way anymore. Of course, in the book, I'm talking about flying off just because you can, really getting out of anywhere. Um, and I now I am older. I have responsibilities with my family, and so that those things are not only not really possible, but also I think part of what the discovery of this book is about that those don't really bring you the satisfaction that you hope it will. So it's a little bit the realization that I don't need to be doing those things. I like that I can do it, but to what end? What is it that one can really gain from it?
Yeah, and I think that's a challenge sometimes for travel writing in that, you travel yeah, you travel to a place and we're not all young anymore. We can't take tons of risks. So engaging with like new relationships with places is incredibly important. And I think yeah, you picked a really interesting title for a book, which I think touches on like one of the main conflicts of travel writing elsewhere, right? Harkens towards difference, right? It's not here, it's not there. Um, Maybe not even where you're going, right? So I'm interested for you, how difference might be a defining conflict for you in this book, and maybe also how difference might be a way that you maybe approach travel now that you're not so youthful and reckless and full of all that bravado, or maybe you still are, but hide it better. I don't know. But difference as a defining kind of like conflict. I don't know if you've had thoughts about that.
I think there's all sorts of motivations to travel, and also just as many reasons for travel writing or travel photography for that matter. Sometimes you travel to get away, to escape yourself, to escape your environment. And there it's very much about, I mean, it can be about um, having something easy, like let's say going to a resort and having people wait on you. It
Hmm.
can be about something a bit more complex, like going someplace where nobody speaks the same language as you. And so you're freed from some desire or some need to be understood and to be connecting with the people around you. But really, maybe the desire is to feel on your own, even if you're not. Um, so I think, different modes of travel give something different to us.
Mm.
And some reasons might be more important to other people at any given time. And, some might be a well that you just keep returning to time and again. Um,
Mm.
I don't know what do
Well,
you think?
what's the well that you keep returning to? That unless that's a difficult question. Maybe it's changed so much.
Yeah, maybe it changes based on what my needs are at any given moment.
Mm.
I would say for a while, I enjoyed the experience of being the fish out of water, very, um, you know, being in a culture so unlike your own, around languages that are
Mm.
so unlike your own. It forces you into a new mind space where you get to ask questions about who you really are, why it really matters, which beliefs are your own and which are those that you've just absorbed from culture, and what
Hmm.
do you want to keep and what do you want to lose. Um, so maybe that for me that like coming of age of trying to come to an identity or a sense of self was tied to that. But I
Mm.
do feel more confident in a self now, which is not to say that that won't be attractive again, because I think the self is constantly being reinvented.
Sure, yeah. Is there any sense of loss for that former
Well, of course. I
self?
mean, anytime you grow, you you by nature are letting go of who you were, of maybe some things that you did hold dear, um, that
Hmm.
that you need to let go of, or that you, yeah, or maybe you don't even know that you are letting go of them until you look around and realize, like, what's going on? Who am I? Who are all these people?
Yeah, very interesting.
Do you have a
Um,
well?
do I have a well that I keep going back to? I don't know. I think in terms of um all my writing, I'm looking for any kind of difference that makes texture. So that's very situational and very
Mm,
of the moment. Um, of course, when I was younger, maybe I was more reckless, but there's also times in my adult life that I'm also reckless too. And depending on the day, the week, the month, maybe those are the kind of conflicts I'm seeking when I'm going out and traveling. I think now, like, one thing I'm really interested with is not that I'm, I'm only mid 40s, but like, thinking about mobility a little bit and how fast and how accessible travel can be as I grow older. And that sometimes changes I guess the texture of the moment in a way, right? Like a great hike in the middle of a very, very deep forest in the Pacific Northwest or in Austria or somewhere is something that potentially I might not be able to do in who knows, 5 years, 10 years. There's could always be an accident, but I think getting older too, you kind of realize that certain places are not as accessible to you anymore. Also, getting into certain places can be very different than they used to be. Going to a club, for example, you start to stick out a little bit more because maybe you're the oldest people in the room, and that creates like a kind of different texture and conflict when it comes to travel and entering new places. Olga Tarkowski, the famous Polish writer, talks about this a little bit in her book Flights, where she speaks about being a woman and growing older. That this is her claim. She says she becomes invisible, right? She's not as uh, maybe as she says, maybe not as eye catching as she used to be. So she can like blend into the background a little bit. And for her, that's a blessing. As a writer, she can stand back and kind of observe and never be at the center of the conversation. Maybe that's something interesting to throw back at you. Not the aging question and not the question about being a woman traveling, but as a photographer, right? You have potentially an instrument that you can hide behind a little bit. I don't know. Some people do not like to engage with the camera. Some people do. And I'm wondering a little bit about like how you see writing and photography as different modes for capturing travel. Do you see strengths in one over the other, or do you prefer to engage with one more than the other? Maybe that's a too broad of a question,
yeah.
but
Now, I don't prefer one over the other, although I go through periods of identifying more with one than the other. But I would say,
hmm,
if you're a writer walking around anywhere, you can be writing in your head without
mm,
necessarily drawing attention to yourself. Which is it's just quietly observing. Maybe you take notes, but
mm,
it's just a matter of being present and using your powers of observation and taking those things into your memory.
mm,
Um, if you're a photographer, um, obviously there are subtle ways of recording people without their knowledge or consent. I'm not such a fan of that. So I
mm.
I tend to take photographs of people who know they're being photographed only. Um, and and I would say that's I mean, as you pointed out, that can be like a camera can be a reason to go in somewhere, or an excuse, I guess is what I mean.
Mm.
Otherwise, you don't have an excuse to be in a location. But if you are holding a camera, then people kind of file that away as, oh, okay, yeah, that person's taking pictures, and they kind of they know how to categorize it, and it becomes less threatening in a way.
Yeah, there's this this makes me think about this one section where you head out to a lake and a man approaches you who happens to be nude, and you're at a nude beach. And there is actually an engagement with this very question about, I guess, consent with photography and the the different acts of writing versus photography. And I was wondering actually maybe if you could read a little bit um, from page 92 from an hour or so into the conversation.
Mm.
Just as a setup for people who are listening, Catherine is at a lake, a nude lake, it turns out, and a man approaches and sits down with her and engages in a very long conversation. There's a little bit of back and forth in your head as to whether or not you should or should not be taking a photograph of him. Um,
Mm.
I think that's good enough setup.
Yeah.
Maybe. Okay.
Okay. An hour or so into the conversation, I ask if I can take his photo, and he answers by ignoring the question, talking about something else entirely. I'm not an asshole. I don't try to sneak a shot while he's distracted. But eventually, as another hour passes, because I am here to take photographs, I take out my camera and capture the view over the water instead. The mood shifts. Now that my camera is in hand, he takes his leave. I walk in the drizzle back to my rental car, deliberating fair trades. I leave with a portrait of a sunset instead of a person, but it was still a trade. I'd like to think that he walked away from that bench on the hill feeling richer, though I'll never know for sure. I walked away with a conversation in my head, the reward of having shut up long enough to hear someone else's story. If I wasn't a photographer, would I go to a nudist beach on a rainy day in winter? If I wasn't a writer, would I be open to hearing the sad stories of a stranger? Is it the other way around? If I didn't do those things, would I feel alive at all? I drive to the next place, some hipster cafe in the city that seems so far removed from a quiet conversation on a bench that when I arrive, it feels like I've been on a long journey. I order a coffee from a barista with a fake smile delivered genuinely, but that exchange is only commerce. It's consequential. I muse on that old man, and I already have trouble remembering what he looked like. Sitting right next to a person, it's hard to examine them closely. The picture that I wanted to take can't quite hold still in my memory. Its reality warps and dissipates like Fata Morgana. But I do not need the photo to document what I saw. The two of us spoke without owing each other anything.
Really nice. And it brings up another kind of question around travel writing, just as a practice in general. Um, you talk a little bit about the reward here and whether the reward is just the conversation, whether it is the documentation. And I wonder when you feel that the experience has gone beyond something that you just want to hold on to in your memory, when it becomes something even more than just something worthy of a journal. Where does it for you kind of become a story worth telling to an audience as opposed to just holding it for yourself?
I suppose when I've synthesized it into something that I think has meaning,
Hmm.
meaning or metaphor, but beyond myself and beyond what it means to me, but what does it say about being human? How can I connect it to other experiences that give it something, yeah, something that I can create a story out of.
Hmm. And for you, like between writing and photography, how do you tell stories? Like here, the writing is really apparent, the photography is really apparent. How do you go about treating narratives in the two different forms?
In this book,
In this
or
book, yeah.
yeah,
You can also talk in general, but I think let's talk about the book for
yeah.
now.
Yeah, I mean, this book is quite different, I would say, to my own mode of creation, at least thus far, in the sense that the writing is all quite fragmented. It's these vignettes that kind of pass through windows. I'm flitting around in time and space. Um, it's not linear. It's kind of like a shoebox full of postcards.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think when it came to storytelling within this book, it became, I mean, first of all, a dialogue between the text and photos. Like the
Hmm.
text I think of as more descriptive. I'm recounting things that have happened, and the photos are so much more atmospheric. They're
Mm.
they're giving more of a feeling or a soundtrack, if you will, to accompany that description. Um, and Yeah, that's what I'd say about that.
Well, how do you treat fidelity between the two different forms? Because you're talking about kind of like a shoebox kind of collection of pulling out, memories. Like, do you feel one is more honest than the other? Do you treat one as more honest? How do you even treat honesty in travel writing? This is a discussion I have with my students quite a lot.
Hmm.
So I'm wondering from your standpoint, like how close are you to the truth with everything
Yeah.
here? I mean, the
That's interesting
truth,
because
not big philosophy truth, but like truth for you, right?
yeah, I do think it is a truth of both travel writing and travel photography, that so much of it is aspirational,
Hmm.
in the sense that it's designed to create a certain sex appeal with travel of, you know, um, either for the distant land, which is so desirable, or for the person experiencing it, which is
Hmm.
to say, look how amazing I am that I have been somewhere.
Hmm.
This is not aspirational. I mean, except in the sense of lessons learned, wisdom, and let's say an examined life through travel. Um, so my relationship to the truth is, I'm trying to create something with emotional resonance. So the images are, they're all atmospheric. They're not descriptive, but like, is a tree a tree? Yes, a tree is a tree.
Hmm.
Um, and and the writing is, I it is written in a way that I think is very it's as close to approaching the voice inside my head as
Hmm.
possible. And I would say the content is as well.
Okay. Well, you say that the book starts out with like a lot of bravado. Is there any performative element to that, or is this like, are you really trying to capture? You said a lot of this material was written 10 years ago. I don't know when a lot of this actual travel took place. Is it close
Mm,
to that time, or
yeah.
have you kind of like reframed it in a way to create this like narrative landscape?
No, I mean it was mostly written about events that were lived in the first person, things that I was
Hmm.
going through that I was trying to make sense of. Um, but if I think about like the bravado, and I mean that's resonant to, I mean, to like, maybe I want to say any psychological journey where you are using a defense mechanism to protect yourself against certain things that are uncomfortable, and then there's this slow unraveling as you approach towards the core of what it is you are and what it is you're escaping.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah, I find I ask these questions because I find performance and personas very interesting for travel writing because they can really act as strange sounding boards for the places that are being visited, the voices of people who are there. Um, for example, like David Sedaris does a lot of travel writing and his usual performative element. And I don't know like how much the character has now become the person and the person has become the character with David Sedaris, but like he tends to put on a very pompous attitude to show that we're all pompous in a way. He kind of like um he kind of like conflates himself a little bit to prove a point. Um,
Mm.
so maybe if you weren't doing this with yourself, are there any characters in here where you feel that you've done any conflation, or are you really again like trying to report very closely?
I mean, it is a truth, and I even say in the book that I am reporting things as I recall them,
Hmm.
which obviously leaves things out, which
Hmm.
it is the a kind of truth inside my mind. If these other people, like if Nora were to tell these stories, I do not know. I mean, even when I went Nora and Lake both I showed early drafts of this work to,
Oh yeah.
and both of them told me that they did see themselves reflected in it, or that it did seem on to them. But I don't want to pretend that my reality is the same as everyone's reality. For example, that old man on a hill, what did he
Hmm.
experience that day?
You don't know.
I don't know. And I can speculate. I mean, maybe to some extent, I do think that when you're traveling, which is to say when you're meeting people that you may not necessarily ever see again, it does leave room for you, I mean, to share secrets, to share sides of yourself that ordinarily you wouldn't tell people. At the same time, it leaves room for you to pretend. So
Hmm.
I don't know to what extent these people are revealing themselves to me, and to what extent they are themselves performing. Um, it's all the self and the mask. I don't know, but you said earlier that you debate quite a lot with your students on this. What is the debate?
Well, a lot of the debate I make with my students is a just be more vulnerable, more open.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's actually, in a way, a lot of dishonesty when you're creating travel writing and you're not exposing yourself. I think that there is something to be said for writers almost embarrassing themselves with their writing, especially when it comes to travel, because
Yeah.
you're really hanging yourself out there. There's a lot of potential for mistakes, and there's a lot of potential for uh, misperceiving a situation or misunderstanding the person across from you. If we're risk averse to that, nothing comes out of it. It's kind of it's an exercise in reservation and boredom. And I think by exposing yourself and being more honest and approaching situations with kind of like a, I don't know, I'm just kind of like a dumb traveler attitude, more conflict arises. And that's actually where the writer learns more about themselves, and also where the reader will actually learn more too, because you've taken the step that maybe potentially that they won't take either. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, as travel writers, we have a real responsibility in a way to kind of um, take the chances potentially that other people can't, by uh, either um, reward of being privileged, whatever it might be, or that a person might be too scared to take the step that you're going to take. Say, go into a country where you don't speak the language or don't understand the culture, and you bring something back for them, potentially also for yourself as well. I always liked, I always prefer travel writers who go into a place with kind of a aw shucks, I really don't know anything kind of attitude, and really, really are okay with embarrassing themselves. There's this really great travel writer, JD Daniels, who does this quite often. We often find him in some hotel room uh, snorting pills and not really sure how he got there. Uh, and not a lot of writers will write about that from an honest perspective, and talk about like the loneliness of the road, or those kind of things as well. But that's the product of being elsewhere, right? You're not, look at that plug, right? It's the that's the benefit of being elsewhere, right? You're not at home where the creature comforts are there, the familiarity is there. Um, and I also maybe want to point a little bit towards what you're doing a little bit in the book as well, where there's also almost like a disassociative element, if I can go so far. Like
You tell me, what do you mean?
well, I mean, there's a sense of I'm running away to find home, but I don't really know where home is, and I'm not really sure where I belong. And that's actually, I think, a very interesting kind of conflict for a lot of these different conversations that you're having in the book. Um, what was there something that you were consciously engaging with as you're writing these essays, as a through line?
Yes, in the sense that I mean, as someone who has lived abroad so many years and traveled so much, I have long uh, struggled with the idea of home and what that means,
Hmm.
and um, kind of have thought about, any place you go, you could turn into a home, but how do you
Hmm.
feel there? Who do you become when you are there? I think some people are more fixed in stone as people than I am. I think um, I have been a bit fluid, and so when I go to a different place, I feel the friction. Or you're calling it the texture, and I quite liked that word. There's a certain texture of where your edges meet a
Hmm.
place, and some places feel more readily home-like. I grew up in Texas, and without ever really being able to put my finger on it, I could recognize that I was not quite at home
Hmm.
in the sense that so many of the things that I valued were not valued by the people around me.
Hmm.
And I couldn't help but feel maybe that a lot of the things of who I was were not particularly valued by the value system of that place.
Hmm.
Going somewhere else and finding people and places that did value that, where there was less tension, less texture in that, or a smoother texture, let's say, less
Hmm.
tension in that relationship. I was able to see better what a home might feel like.
Hmm. Hmm. Just to hop onto this texture thing, I think a lot about texture in terms of all writing. Certain scenes will have a texture, like it could be rough, it could be smooth. It's almost like a structural thing for me to think about
Mm,
texture. But also, I think when I first came to Amsterdam for the first time back when I was a student in the early aughts, I remember how all of the surfaces felt very smooth in a way. The bridges slowly curving, the rivers. It felt, in a way, to use your word, frictionless. You can move around the city in all these ways that were quite compelling, that opened up a lot of new avenues. But I think texture is very important when it comes also to going to places where language is potentially a challenge. Sometimes through the way that people talk, the texture of how they talk to you, is how you know you're doing right or how you know you're doing wrong. And that allows you to engage with conflict without there actually being like conflict, right?
mm,
And also just as like an organizational rule for writing, I like to think about difference rather than conflict. Things were this way before, and now they're this way, and that creates a kind of texture that becomes a potential story, right? Rather than, you have to have a car explode and, a big high speed chase or something like that to create conflict.
yeah.
Your book itself is also full of a lot of quiet moments, and I was trying to think of like what that central kind of conflict slash concern is for you, and I kept coming back to this one line, I'm not going to write any more love stories. And it made me think a lot about like how love is playing a very central role throughout the book. At least in terms of, I mean, you have this long conversation with a guy who might uh, not be 100% there on a nude beach. You're chasing a friend um, through Texas that you'll never find, or she's trying to catch up to you. You're engaging with these lovers over several years that may involve love or may not involve love. You say I'm not going to write any more love stories. Is this a book about love?
Yeah, there's my bravado again. I'm not going to write any more love stories.
Uh-huh.
I think the word that I would use more than love is it's about connection and all of its different sorts. And I think there's something to be said about
Mm.
the value of connecting, because I think you can show a lot of love for something that or you can feel love for something that you feel even quite distant from, or that feels somehow ungraspable or
Hmm.
um, unattainable. But connection is kind of where it's at for me in this book when it comes to these interactions that I'm having, and the thing that I'm reaching toward is, that kind of undeniable moment of connection between two people that I don't necessarily want to try to define, except you know it when you feel it, sort of thing. You know when you're being present with someone else. Um,
Hmm.
it's a kind of solidarity or fraternity, or just you know the recognition that you are alive as a human in this moment, and someone else is alive as a human in this moment, and you can kind of let go of so many of the things around that gentle fact.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, maybe this is a good opportunity to read another section. Uh, from page 59, I think of an artist like a caged tiger. Maybe this is
Mm,
engaging with
yeah.
some of the things that you were just talking about. It also gives the audience a chance to hear your wonderful prose in here.
All right. Until when is a good moment to read? Well,
It's up to you. I think
uh,
maybe until the end of 61, or you can go maybe a little bit further
yeah.
if you're
All
feeling
right.
that.
Let's see. Yeah. All right. I think of an artist like a caged tiger, pacing back and forth across the country of her enclosure, roaring her discontent, and how she must love the walls of that enclosure. We're driving east along the old Route 66, which isn't anything special now, just one more nightmarish highway of many in a connected country. But one thing is forever the same. When you are urged from within to keep moving, there is no such thing as a rival. One road just introduces you to the next. This particular road trip leads to Houston, where I'll take a plane back to Amsterdam. A series of roads leading to an airport feels like an ending, or maybe a beginning, while in fact it's neither. Everything carries on in every direction all the time. Freedom isn't choosing between a couple of alternatives, it's authoring order for Maelstrom. It's a lot easier to react to order that already exists, and that's what I mean about the walls. There is no zookeeper. The tiger constructs her own constraints. I never saw it, never felt it, until the moment I had finally cleared from view any worn paths, creating a life that was truly mine, and realizing in a panic that I was not yet done roaring. Into the infinite I roared. The empty echo had nowhere to go, but deep inside, exposing a loneliness of such despair I can't bring myself to describe it. A roar turned inward finds all weaknesses, all fears. But should that tiger find a way to put some walls up, my God, there are so many things to roar about. What sweet release. Stop there.
That's great. Fantastic. I think that did touch a little bit on what we were just talking about, walls
Ooh,
versus connection. This is probably the perfect time to kick it out to some questions. I've just gotten a message. So thank you so much.
thank you, Daniel. Welcome back, Elysia.
I- Thank you. do I have the ability to? You might need to spotlight me.
I think you're the host, so you can
Oh,
spotlight
okay.
yourself.
Okay. Here we go.
Yeah.
So that was
Gotcha.
great. I loved hearing your writing. I'm wondering, so this is a collection of essays and photography. I'm wondering, are there any in particular of either or both categories that you're secretly most excited for people to see or read?
No, I mean, mainly because it is a collection, but it is, as I was saying earlier, it's kind of like these all these vignettes or all these fragments. And so I think they have the most value as a whole because I think that, the sum of their parts becomes elsewhere. So for
Okay.
me, that's what I'm most pleased about, that they're now as a whole.
And speaking of the sum of their parts, do you see photography and writing as two pieces of the same lens, or do they push you to look at a location or situation in different ways?
Mm. For me, the photography in this is so much more atmospheric and it gives a sense of the types of places, but most of them are not descriptive in the sense that you wouldn't necessarily know where things were taken. Some things may be identifiable. For example, my husband, a big rock nerd, would probably say, "Oh, I know where that is," because a certain rock is a certain shape. But
Hmm.
I mean, mostly it's not intended to be something descriptive about those places. It's more about there's
Evoking the
always
feeling. Mm.
yeah, there's always a sense of tension, a sense of movement, a sense of a sense of that feeling more than the description, and the words are the thing that are more the vehicle. So
Hmm.
there's the meditation and the images that give you the feeling, and then there's the words that take you through, that move you.
Okay. Okay, we have a question here from Frederick who asks, the universal effect in quotes that you were speaking about, does that come from the book's inward-looking personal aspect? Do you think that's,
Uh,
yeah, it's
I'm not sure
it's
what that
about
means. But which universal aspect was I talking about? I don't even remember.
would you think, I guess, introspection is universal?
Oh, I mean, everyone's different with this. I mean, I think as much as I'd like to project my own way of thinking onto everyone, I think some things are, everyone's interior world is something a little bit different, though we share a lot of qualities as humans. Um, Not everyone is so. I mean, I think some people spend their whole lives deliberately trying to avoid looking inward or reflecting
Hmm.
on what that world looks like, because it can be quite unpleasant until you um, have a certain peace with it. So maybe, maybe the extent to which I am trying to pull it all apart and see what it means becomes familiar to people who have done similar things, even if they are avoidant of it.
Hmm.
But I can't say.
Okay. Uh, Colleen had a question. Can you talk a bit about the places that you describe in your book? How varied and different are they? And is there otherness a unifying factor?
Hmm. So in the book, I'm writing about Amsterdam, California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas. There's a period that's kind of going on a road trip along that way. Um, it's in Malta, it's in Tokyo, um, and probably some more places as well. The photography is really from all over, but as well, yeah. But you wouldn't necessarily know that, like if it's a photograph of a tree, unless you happen to know a certain species and recognize it, you wouldn't necessarily know. Um, I do think that, there are so many tropes, and I'm sure Daniel knows about this a lot with regard to travel
Mhm.
writing, but both in travel writing and travel photography, there are so many tropes or even just shortcuts that people take in regards to, like, this is what travel looks like, or this, if I show you this, you'll know that that means travel. And so, you know, as someone is quite contemplative about what travel means,
Mm.
I'm not super keen to romanticize the exotic. I think that's a bit of a crutch, a personal crutch, like to think of yourself and your own culture as normal and to romanticize the exotic simply for its difference. And at the same time, what I was trying to do, at least, was to demonstrate in the work that I am talking about going to quite a different places. I'm not just talking about, traveling a couple hours here and there, away by car or something. I'm trying to describe that I am, which is the truth of the matter. I am going to, like, all these different places.
Mhm. Yeah, this relates to a question that Dana's asking about the fiction versus nonfiction of your illustrated book. And do you think, other than the fact that obviously you're speaking about events that have clearly happened, do you think there's a difference in the way you write for fiction versus these nonfiction essays?
The difference in the way I write between fiction and nonfiction?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm writing nonfiction, I think I'm sculpting my language in a very, it's trying to get really precise. And I think I'm not afraid to be intellectually ambitious. And this book, the writing is much more attempting to be as plain spoken and direct as possible, as much as possible to the voice in my head.
Mm-hmm.
So it is, obviously it is crafted, but it's crafted to a different yardstick entirely than the other things that I write.
Okay. Okay. And Dana was also wondering how you chose images for the book. You were saying, I guess they're linked to that location, but you were saying that you focus more on the feelings they evoke rather than trying to visually capture a location.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But I mean, the text and the images are all intermixed throughout the book.
Mm-hmm.
They're not they're not one side. They're not directly connected. But when it came to editing the photos, I was looking very much at images that, in terms of content and emotion, try to evoke tension and movement.
Mm.
And that took me to a few different places, including trees and water and the road and different modes of transportation. Um, and as well, that I was looking for a certain mood, which was somehow quiet and calm underneath or on top of that tension, so that on the surface maybe it looks quite calm and peaceful, but something always feels a little bit off. It's always got a little bit of tension and movement in it.
Mm.
Hmm. So iPad Peeps says that you successfully recapture Kerouac in your feel. How would you say that you differ from Kerouac?
I am not a fan of Kerouac, as
Okay.
so um, no, but no, I do think, like, what I have in common with Kerouac, perhaps, is the kind of on the road feeling, which is I'm trying to capture the liveness of movement, what it feels like to be moving. Um, I I don't feel like I share his, and I do think that he is one of those authors that conflates himself and his character quite a lot. So if I talk about what Kerouac feels, I'm talking about his character, but I kind of think I'm talking about Kerouac.
Mm,
I, I I think his writing has such a smugness to it that is about it's self-congratulatory in the sense of look at what I've done. And I don't know, it's I don't know. I can't help but feel that he uses movement to escape accountability. And
Mm.
I don't live my life that way. This is a bit in contrast to, the way that I open the book with the bravado of moving on, um, but I don't share uh, that with him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, here's a question for both of you. Can either of you think of a time or an experience that was pivotal in your understanding of the world? And where were you and what were you doing?
Daniel?
Mm.
I was just thinking about a short story that short film that I was just watching yesterday. I think it's called Camino. Anyway, it's about a French woman who is traveling through islands, and she gets confronted basically at some point where, she has to just realize that she comes from a very different perspective than the locals who have been hosting her.
Mm.
Mm.
I mean, I always joke with my students that, I left Ohio with like what few pennies I had rubbed together from like a coffee barista job in
Mm-hmm.
Cleveland and showed up in New York City with like a piece of straw in my mouth and a hat on and like, look at how big the buildings are. Like I think more for me, I think like moving to Europe for the first time or coming to Europe for the first time where it was the big kind of change for me, just seeing that, the center of the universe is not America, which I already knew
Mm-hmm.
was true, but experiencing it, especially during like the Bush Jr. presidency, it was a very eye-opening experience, and it changed my politics. It changed only the way that I thought about how I engage with
Mm.
other people. It also toughened
That's
me up because I was a Ohio Midwest boy, and there's very open, and I realized maybe I could be open but guarded at the same time.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Martin is wondering, when you experience these things, was elsewhere about looking for novelty, a place of interest to learn from and experience, or would you say it was more about searching for belonging or something you felt that was missing, or something else?
Um, Probably some combination of things. Is this restlessness in my own skin, searching for identity, searching for connection, searching for belonging, um, searching for expansion of self, I think would
Mm,
be a really big part of it. Just having this underlying feeling that I wanted to be more, I wanted to see more, I wanted to absorb everything that I could. I mean, I think anyone who has artistic ambitions knows that you have to see things, you have to experience things to kind of have something to say. Um, so I wasn't artistically driven per se in traveling, but I would say that I was driven to expand self and
Hmm.
probably to escape self, become self. I don't know, all of those things, and it's
mhm. And another question for you both. When you travel, what's the one thing you must do in any location you visit? Like go to an art museum, go for a hike, get the best meal.
I think I'm probably food oriented.
Hmm.
But I mean, every place is different. Like if you go somewhere for a beach, you want to go to the beach, right? But like, what would I do
Hmm.
as well? Yeah, probably food. Like find something
Uh,
to tickle.
hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
get it.
yeah, mine isn't exactly like a place or anything like that. But and this is definitely a privileged position. I know that not everybody can do this, but I always at least when I first land in a new place, I turn off my phone for at least 24 hours and I
Mhm.
go for a long walk and get lost without any plan, no map, nothing like that. So I'm surprised. It's like one of my
Mm.
big things, and am surprised, which is nice.
Daniel, how would you say your experience of travel has changed since mobile phones, like your son's smartphones, let's say?
Well, it's easier to get to places, right?
Right.
And if you
Mhm.
get into trouble, it's easier to, I guess, call someone. I'm I am not a huge smartphone user when I'm traveling. I generally, if I have to like pay for mobile Wi-Fi or whatever, I'll choose not to. I'll find a different way. I'll print out maps and stuff. So for me, like I try to keep it like as analog as possible. But yeah, you find stuff faster. I think for on the positive, you can often get into uh conversations with people before you come to a city and find some interesting things to do if you have like a nice connection or something that might have been impossible without a letter or something back in the day,
Mhm.
which I appreciate.
Mm.
For sure.
Colleen gave us the perfect question to end on. Catherine, would you say that you have arrived at the end of the book? Is the end of the book like the end of a journey for you?
Yeah, in the context of the story, when it comes to elsewhere, I mean, and I don't know that I agree that there are such thing as spoilers for this book, but at the same time, I don't want to give away everything, but it is kind of the long journey to yourself sort of thing, and I wouldn't say I end on a particularly resolved point, but for me, at least in the writing of the work and knowing when the work was done, it did have to do with this um, at least peacefulness with the idea of what the central question was when it came to like why am I so restless? Why do I constantly go elsewhere? And I did feel like I addressed it, which is not to say
Mm.
answered it, but addressed it.
Okay. All right. Well, it's a great way to end. If you would like to read that journey for yourself and find out how it actually ends, Elsewhere is available at bookstores worldwide right now. I want to thank everyone here for attending. Thank you so much, Daniel, for moderating, and Catherine for sharing the insides of your head. Um, For more about Catherine's work and past, present, and future, you can visit her website, octobernight.com. That's October with a K. And you can also see more from Daniel at writer danieljcecil.com and honinghouse.com. And I've been your MC, Elysia. If you're interested in hearing more of my voice, you can find that at thelorehounds.com. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Elysia, for
Thank you,
hosting,
Alicia.
and thank you everyone also for joining. I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.